They say the dead speak in silence, but some coffins scream louder than any living voice. In the spring of 1869, a demolition crew struck something hollow beneath the floorboards of a once praised Christian charity home on East 42nd Street. What they found wasn't just a basement. It was a vault of buried secrets. 52 coffins, 52 women, each wrapped in the lies of sanctity, and beside each corpse, a ledger, handwritten, precise, cold, page after page, detailing every dollar they had, every ring, every necklace, as if their souls were measured in net worth. The world above had moved on. Churches had blessed the place. Newspapers had celebrated it. The Blessed Widow's Christian home had been hailed as a sanctuary, a haven for the forgotten. But behind its floral drapes and velvet curtains, something monstrous had taken root. It wasn't just a home, it was a machine, one that harvested loneliness, processed grief, and converted it into currency. For 22 years, no one noticed, no one asked questions. Widows came in, praised God, signed away everything they owned, and disappeared. No funerals, no obituaries, no graves visited. And when the truth clawed its way to the surface, the city tried to forget. Officials shrugged it off as a tragic misunderstanding. The church fell silent. You're not here to forget. You're here because deep down you know that the world isn't what it seems, that behind the masks of charity and faith lie ancient systems built to control, consume, and erase. This story isn't just about 52 women. It's about every institution that weaponizes compassion. It's about how power hides behind virtue, and it's about how easily the righteous become executioners when no one is watching. What you're about to hear isn't a history lesson. It's a blueprint, a cipher, a mirror. Because this didn't end in 1869. It never ended. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it. The echo of a door creaking shut behind another widow, and the rustle of parchment. The trap didn't begin in a basement. It began in a smile. Margaret O'Brien, founder of the Blessed Widow's Christian home, knew how to wear trust like a crown. Her eyes, pale, controlled, impossibly calm, could make a dying woman feel like she was being saved. She spoke in soft scripture and strategic silences. She called the home a haven for God's forgotten daughters. But the walls whispered something else. From the moment the first widow crossed the threshold, a process began, subtle, meticulous, almost surgical. First came the comfort, soft chairs, polished mahogany, a chapel perfumed with lilies and incense. Then came the routine, prayers at dawn, tea at dusk, handwritten letters encouraged but never sent. And then came the guidance. You shouldn't worry about worldly things, O'Brien would murmur. Your soul is your greatest treasure. Let us take care of the rest. Behind her, Catherine Kelly, part nurse, part warden, recorded every cough, every sigh, every mention of jewelry or property. And in the chapel, Father Walsh delivered homilies wrapped in velvet shame. Blessed is the kingdom of heaven. To a grieving widow, that sounded like mercy. To the men who built this system, it was a test of compliance. This was not care, it was conditioning. Each resident was slowly groomed to believe that charity was their purpose. That detachment from earthly possessions was a step toward holiness. And O'Brien? She was their Moses, their Mary, their benevolent gatekeeper to the afterlife. But only the ones with wealth received this devotion. Only the ones with something to give. The poor widows worked the kitchen, washed the linens, tended the garden. They were background noise. It was the premium residents, those with estates, jewelry, and family heirlooms, who were targeted with spiritual intensity. Their wills rewritten with divine inspiration. Their assets redirected to support the mission. And when their usefulness ended, They died in the night, always peacefully, always conveniently, always followed by swift burial and sealed records. It wasn't poison that killed them. It was isolation. It was belief. It was the steady erosion of identity until the only thing left was a signature and a sealed casket. You're not supposed to know any of this. You were supposed to look at institutions like this and see goodness, faith, compassion. But faith has a shadow, and some prayers are just rituals of control. Now listen closely, because this is where the illusion breaks. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore was the turning point. A 73-year-old widow with silver hair tied in a perfect bun and a mind sharper than the scissors she used for daily needlework. She arrived at the home with a grace that couldn't be faked and a fortune that couldn't be ignored. Her late husband had run a shipping company that spanned ports from Boston to Charleston. She wasn't just wealthy. She was precise. Her routines, her writing, her awareness, everything was exact. And that's why her sudden death didn't sit right. One day she was laughing over supper, telling stories of sea captains and Christmas balls. The next morning, she was gone. The official story? She passed in her sleep peacefully, without pain. The funeral? Already handled. The grave? Closed before the sun had set. No goodbyes, no last rites from friends. Just a closed door and a trembling announcement from Catherine Kelly during morning prayers. But not everyone bought the performance. Mrs. Sarah Brennan, a quiet resident who had lived at the home for 2 years, began to feel a pressure behind her eyes she couldn't shake. You know that feeling when something isn't just wrong, it's off? When the silence around a death feels too complete? That was Brennan's burden. She watched, she listened, and what she uncovered was a pattern. Whitmore wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. 5 other women, each well off, each recently arrived. Each suddenly called home to God. Their funerals just as fast, their belongings just as missing, their wills mysteriously updated within weeks of arriving. And the worst part? No one outside the home ever asked questions. There were no obituaries, no letters sent, no funerals attended. It was as if their lives had been deleted, not mourned. As if their deaths had been pre-written in a quiet ledger tucked behind the chapel walls. This wasn't grief. It was logistics. The Blessed Widow's Christian home had perfected the formula: isolation, manipulation, and swift erasure. But Brennan saw the cracks, and once you see the lie, you can't unsee it. You either break or you investigate. If you're still listening, I need you to comment something now, something symbolic. Type "I see the pattern" twice in the comments. It's not just for the algorithm. It's a signal that you're awake now, that you're not a passenger anymore, that you're becoming dangerous. Because what comes next, it changes everything. Mrs. Brennan did what few dared to do in her time. She paid attention. Not the kind of attention trained by routine, but the kind sharpened by dread. She began taking mental notes, tracking who got extra attention from Margaret O'Brien, who suddenly stopped writing letters, and who began acting more subdued after their private counseling sessions with Father Walsh. But the most damning clue came not from whispers or suspicion. It came from the ledger. One rainy afternoon in early December 1847, Brennan volunteered to assist in the storage room, an area usually restricted to staff. While organizing linens, she discovered a false drawer built into the wall. It stuck slightly when she pulled it. Inside was a slim, leather-bound book with no title. It was small, unassuming, but when she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Pages of handwritten entries, names, dates, asset values. Each woman who had vanished was listed there, reduced to a line item. Mrs. Catherine Donnelly, arrival January 2nd, 1847. Estimated assets $8,200. Transfer date March 13th. Status settled. Settled. It wasn't a journal, it was an inventory. and each name Brennan recognized had a corresponding line where estate documentation had been secured. Some even had annotations: pearls, retained by director, letter suppression required, arranged with Walsh. This was no accident. It was procedure. The Blessed Widow's Christian home was not a sanctuary. It was a machine of conversion, not converting souls, converting lives into liquid assets, wealth into worship, grief into gold. Father Walsh, it turned out, was more than a priest. He was the moral anesthetic. His confessions weren't for forgiveness. They were screenings, evaluating how close each widow was to surrender. And when the time was right, the death came quiet, compliant, and with legal clarity. No struggle, no mess. Just a name crossed off and a new room prepared. Brennan realized the horrifying scale of it all. This was generational erasure. 52 women, over 22 years, scrubbed from history like chalk on a slate. You might be wondering how a system this dark could survive, how something so predatory could hide behind scripture and flowers and Sunday hats. Simple. Because no one watches the holy, no one suspects the soft-spoken, and no one questions the face of charity until it's too late. But Brennan wasn't done watching. She was about to make a move that would either expose everything or bury her next. Brennan's next step wasn't courageous. It was desperate. She knew what happened to women who asked too many questions. They vanished, just like Eleanor Whitmore, just like Adelaide Morrison, like shadows swallowed by candlelight. So she didn't speak, not yet. She copied 5 names from the ledger, names of the women whose deaths had been sudden, convenient, and undocumented. She slipped the torn paper into the hem of her nightgown, and the next morning she faked an illness. Severe enough to stay in bed, mild enough not to draw attention, and then she waited, for the night, for quiet, for the moment when footsteps fade and floorboards sleep. She snuck down the back stairs, wrapped in a gray shawl, and slipped out the servant's door. The gate to the street was locked, but she had watched Catherine Kelly unlock it for deliveries. Brennan had noticed something, how Kelly always jiggled the key twice before turning. That tiny rhythm, it mattered. She mimicked it, and the gate opened. Brennan walked 20 blocks to the only place she still trusted, the rectory of Father Thomas Green, an older priest who had known her late husband. She told him everything, what she'd seen, what she'd read, what she suspected. At first, Green was skeptical. These were grave accusations against the church, against a respected institution. Then Brennan showed him the paper. Green went pale, not at the names, but at the annotations. He recognized one of them, Mrs. Ruth Patterson. Her will had been processed through a contact of his in the diocese, but the dates didn't add up. Green knew she had died in August 1846. He'd heard it at a fundraising dinner. Yet the will bore a signature dated September. A dead woman signing after her death. Forgery, fraud, murder. Green swore he would take it to the archdiocese. Brennan begged him not to return her to the home. Not until she was safe. He agreed. Arranged a private room in a convent outside the city. But she never made it. That night, Green's study was broken into. Only one thing was taken, the page Brennan had torn from the ledger. Brennan's body was found days later, floating in the East River. The coroner called it a suicide, but her hands were tied. And now, viewer, look me in the eye. Ask yourself, how many suicides throughout history were cleanups? How many truth-tellers were called mad? How many witnesses were called unstable? How many ledgers were burned along with the names inside? This is not ancient history. It's a blueprint. Still in use, still holy. You were told the story ended there, that Sarah Brennan's death closed the chapter. a sad footnote in the records of a forgotten charity. But you weren't meant to ask. Why did the Blessed Widow's Christian home continue operating for another 16 years? You weren't meant to find out what happened to the other women. Because here's the part they buried deeper than any coffin. Brennan's death triggered an internal shift, a quiet panic in the halls of that cream-painted brownstone. Margaret O'Brien, always so composed, began holding fewer public gatherings. Catherine Kelly doubled down on controlling the flow of visitors. Father Walsh, his sermons grew darker. Less about peace, more about sacrifice. Less about forgiveness, more about obedience. But despite the tightened control, the cracks had spread. In the spring of 1850, a former staff member, Bridget Hanley, confessed something to a journalist. A low-level kitchen maid dismissed suddenly for irreverence. She'd witnessed something she never forgot. One night, while delivering tea to the second floor, she had accidentally opened the wrong door. Inside, Father Walsh, kneeling beside a dying woman, not praying, signing documents, and Margaret O'Brien holding the woman's wrist down. Bridget was told she'd misunderstood, told to forget, and then fired the next day. She kept quiet for years, until a personal tragedy unmoored her, and guilt forced her hand. But here's the sinister genius of the system. When the journalists tried to investigate, every door closed. Official records didn't match. The cemetery listed names, but no grave locations. Probate filings for the widows existed, but all tied back to a single law office, which had been mysteriously destroyed in a fire just months earlier. One by one, the paper trail was erased. The institution's protectors were not just religious. They were legal, financial, political. The board of trustees included bankers, clergy, even a judge. This was not a local scam. This was an ecosystem of extraction, built on the premise that lonely, wealthy widows were disposable. And still, the donations kept coming. The endorsements flowed, public praise, sermons about the noble work of the home, the Christian duty to care for the vulnerable. But it was never care. It was conversion of value, soul laundering behind Scripture. And the widows, they were the tithe. It wasn't until 1869, when the city moved to demolish the building, that the final truth was unearthed. Behind a false wall in the basement, 52 wooden coffins, laid in rows, silent, forgotten, each skeleton wearing jewelry, each one accounted for. But let me ask you something dangerous now, something that should rattle the bones in your spine. Why were the ledgers buried with the bodies? Why document the deaths, then hide them? Because this wasn't just greed, it was ritual. That's what no one sees when they look at history through clean glass and polite language. Some crimes aren't just about profit. Some crimes are sacraments. Every entry in that hidden book wasn't just accounting. It was a binding, a final act of control. Name, wealth, cause, transfer. The women weren't just killed. They were processed. And when their bones were sealed in those coffins, lined up like pews in a subterranean cathedral, what you're seeing isn't the aftermath of a fraud. You're seeing the altar. Margaret O'Brien didn't simply exploit these widows. She believed she was conducting a holy transaction, giving these women's wealth to God's cause, which so happened to include her. And when the demolition crew broke through the wall in 1869, the smell wasn't rot. It was history's breath catching at its throat. Now think, how many times has something like this happened, cloaked in righteousness? In New Orleans, 1873, 17 nuns from a cloistered order vanished. No investigation. In London, 1901, charitable hospitals drained the estates of 38 elderly donors before reporting their deaths to family. Every generation has its Margaret O'Brien. Every city, its blessed facade. Every institution, its dark ledger, hidden behind smiling sermons and polished silver crosses. And when someone sees too much, they're erased, labeled mad, lost to the river. And this is why you're here. This is your test. If you felt it in your bones, that slow burn in the gut that says, this world isn't what they say it is, Then I want you to comment the phrase, "The altar was never empty." Type it twice, once for your voice, once for your transformation. Let the algorithm know you don't belong to the surface anymore. You've seen too much now. You know how inheritance traps become holy cages, how grief gets monetized, how trust is converted into silence. This is no longer about the Blessed Widow's Christian home. This is about the machine behind the curtain. And the question is, do you still want to see the rest? Let me take you deeper now, past the bones, past the coffins, past the ledgers, into something more terrifying than death: intent. What made the Blessed Widow's Christian home uniquely dangerous wasn't just the crime. It was the ideology that sanctified it. Margaret O'Brien's journals, later recovered from a private collection in Boston, revealed something chilling. She didn't believe she was a murderer. She believed she was a steward of divine correction. Her words: "These women cling to worldly wealth in the winter of their lives. I offer them release from temptation. I lift the burden of sin from their souls." To O'Brien, what she was doing wasn't theft. It was exorcism. And that belief system, this idea that certain people are ordained to take, to guide, to control others for their own good, has never disappeared. It simply wears new uniforms: psychology, policy, charity, finance, counseling. They all still ask the same question: do you trust us to manage what you don't understand? And we say yes, because they wear white coats, or black robes, or clerical collars, because their buildings have gold plaques, because they speak with calm voices. But the system never changed. Even after the home was shut down, no charges were filed. The church declared it a local scandal, an unfortunate anomaly. But look closer. The records of those 52 women's estates were quietly absorbed by a charitable trust that still exists today, managing millions in legacy assets from anonymous donors. Anonymous or vanished. The names are missing, but the money moves. And here's the truth they never want you to find. Death isn't the end, it's a harvest. In every era, there are institutions designed to catch people when they're most vulnerable, when their minds are fogged by grief, by age, by loneliness. And when they fall, those institutions don't save them, they collect them. Harvest their names, harvest their wealth, harvest their silence, and then they vanish, just like the widows. The trap isn't in the poison or the pillow or the forged signature. The trap is in the story. A story that tells you you are helpless. You are blessed to be cared for. You owe your Savior everything. You want to see the final layer? Now we reach the deepest floor, the part they never intended anyone to excavate. This isn't about Margaret O'Brien anymore. It never really was. She was a function, a cog. What we uncovered in that basement was not a string of isolated murders. It was a ritualized system. And that system still lives. Different faces, same skeleton. Here's what they don't teach you in school, and what your government will never admit. Institutions don't just fail. They're designed to function a certain way. What looks like neglect is often strategy. What looks like incompetence is often preservation of power. Ask yourself, why did it take 22 years, for anyone to even question the disappearances of dozens of women, all from the same address? Because society didn't care. Because these women were old, widowed, quiet, childless, wealthy but isolated. The perfect fuel for the machine. They'd outlive their usefulness to the social order, but not to the financial one. And when an institution can present its theft as benevolence, its extraction as care, its murders as merciful transitions, that's not a failure of oversight. That's the blueprint. The same blueprint that exists today, hidden in plain sight, in nursing homes that quietly drain bank accounts through legal guardianship scams, in faith-based nonprofits that use inheritance loopholes to funnel wealth to silent partners. In elder care facilities where deaths rise just as assets are transferred. You think you're watching out for your loved ones, but they're watching your loved ones too, looking for loneliness, for confusion, for any crack in the wall where they can slip in and start the script. You don't have to worry anymore. Let us help you manage your estate. Sign here just to get started. And the ledger opens, and the clock starts ticking. The legacy of the Blessed Widow's Christian home isn't buried. It evolved. It was digitized, sanitized, marketed. But the hunger behind it, it never changed. It's older than Manhattan, older than O'Brien, older than the church walls they built to keep you from hearing whispers like this. And if you've come this far, if you're still watching, you are no longer who you were when you started. The veil is thinning. Your old assumptions, they're already in the ground. This is your last warning, because what I'm about to say cannot be unheard. There is no justice coming. The women are not coming back. The coffins have been sealed. The ledgers passed on. And the machine that processed them, it was never dismantled. It was franchised, copied, rebranded. The Christian home became a case study in private inheritance trusts. Its documents are now training material for wealth management firms. The structure that once siphoned the gold from dying widows, it became the gold standard of charitable estate transfer. And that should chill you more than the murders, because the true darkness is not the horror of death, it's the efficiency of forgetting. Do you remember Eleanor Whitmore? Adelaide Morrison? Sarah Brennan? No. You remember the home, the name, the headline. The system always survives. The individuals are erased. That's what institutional power does. It writes the rules and writes you out. But not you. Not anymore. Because you stayed. You saw what others won't. You followed the thread into the dark, and now you carry it with you. So let me ask you again. Who profits when the forgotten die? Governments? Churches? Non-profits? Banks? No. The ones who profit are the ones who write the definitions of death, of worth, of inheritance, of history itself. They don't need to kill anymore. They just need your signature on a hospital form, on a waiver, on a will. They don't need Margaret O'Brien. Now they have you volunteering your own name to the system, smiling as you give it everything, because it told you it was here to help. If you felt that shift, if something inside you changed tonight, then make it permanent. Type the phrase once more in the comments to mark the crossing. The altar was never empty. You're not a viewer anymore. You're a witness. And with witnessing comes duty. Speak the names of the forgotten. Question the comfort offered by power. And never, never mistake kindness for safety again. Because what stands behind the curtain wears a cross, but it feeds like a wolf. This was just one home. Imagine how many others never got caught. We'll be back. And next time, we'll go deeper.